Imagine if you were suddenly granted a wish. Your worst problem in life just magically disappears. Your student debt paid off. Your grandma mysteriously recovers from stage 5 cancer. You get into your dream college. Or in my case, I finally enter a healthy, fulfilling relationship. You would feel amazing, no doubt. I know I would feel like a huge weight was finally lifted off my shoulders. So the question is, why would anyone ever want to hide such great news? That is what I, a psychology student, activist, and Gen Z man, was trying to figure out. Why could someone possibly be embarrassed about having a boyfriend? However, what I found was beyond shocking. Looking into the psychology behind the boyfriend embarrassment trend, I found that not only is it secretly anti-feminist, it reflects a much larger issue of women's mental health around relationships that, if we don't solve quickly, will lead to even more division between men and women and more lonely people worldwide. Let's get into it. So if you aren't chronically online like I am, you probably need a brief explanation of what the boyfriend embarrassment trend actually is. Basically, there's a Vogue article written by, I believe her name is Shantae Joseph, titled, "Is Having a Boyfriend Embarrassing Now?" And it took the internet by storm. This article offers a unique take on the modern dating landscape, claiming that there's been a shift among young women from seeing being in a relationship as an accomplishment to a potential detriment to their personal growth, as well as being frankly pretty annoying to see female influencers putting so much emphasis on their partners in their online content. And in some cases, I completely agree. Dating a guy who's just a complete douchebag or a chronically online gooner who could never hope to satisfy a woman, yeah, that would be pretty embarrassing. But where does that leave the rest of us guys who actually have a social life, a job, who take care of ourselves? We obviously don't want to be lumped in with the incels and losers who could never hope to find a date. But that is the key issue. It's really hard for women to separate the good guys from the incels and losers. So it's safer to assume that a good guy is a loser rather than a loser is a good guy. There's this principle in psychology where our brains have been trained to interpret signs of danger as real more often than not, because it's usually better to have a false alarm go off than to miss a real fire, similar to how smoke detectors work in real life. The good news for men, I would argue though, is that this won't actually change most of your dating prospects in the real world, because not everything that people say online actually translates to real life. The most likely effect I can actually see translating though is less of a willingness from women in general to want to commit to a relationship, which ultimately I would argue is more on us men to figure out how to provide for a woman's changing needs in this modern world. We need to adapt, because blaming women will get us absolutely nowhere. If anything, it'll just make the loneliness crisis worse. A survey conducted on over 100 women found that the manosphere is by far the least attractive male hobby to women. And for good reason. These days, women want someone who view them as an equal, not as a beast to be tamed, or as some lesser creature that must obey their man without question. So yeah, the men need to adapt, but there still is a very important lingering question. Why would your crush be embarrassed to get with you? A presumably decent young man, or whatever you identify as, if you have a promising future and you're conventionally attractive. The Vogue article I referenced earlier has some insight as to what the answer might be, but I don't think it does a good enough job getting into the underlying psychology behind why these women are so reluctant to reveal their relationship status or commit to a relationship. I think what's actually going on here is that straight women have felt the need to disconnect themselves from the patriarchal fairy tales that they've been told their entire lives, to decenter men in their life, and to feel independent. But I would argue that that actually causes a sort of opposite pressure. Pressure on women who would want a relationship not to. Instead, to collectively man bash just to be in solidarity with other women. And I mean, fair enough, right? I can totally understand not being willing to settle for a guy who isn't fulfilling to you. But what I have a harder time understanding is pressuring other women into not dating men merely as a reaction to the oppression of the patriarchy, which is very real, but it still can be harmful to women who actually would want a relationship in a more traditional sense. Creating a culture that encourages you being the best person you can be and following your dreams no matter who you are is awesome. But I'm kind of worried about the mental health of women who seem to dismiss men entirely out of spite. I am trying to hear your concerns as a man. I'm just simply trying to understand why you'd want to talk smack about a guy who wants nothing more than to be there for you and to care for you. Maybe there's just a fundamental disconnect that I will never understand. If you're a woman watching, by the way, comment down your opinion on this whole trend. I would love to hear a perspective from someone who actually would be dating men regularly. What this kind of reminds me of, though, is the whole feminist movement in the 90s, where people popularized the saying, a woman needs a man as much as a fish needs a bicycle. Obviously, they didn't really mean that. I see what the intended message is. You don't have to do the whole get married, have kids, cook, clean, and look pretty kind of trad wife lifestyle if you don't want to. You should be encouraged to have a career and do what you want to as a woman. On the other hand, I see a lot of women channeling their truly awful experiences they've had with men who have hurt them and generalizing them into ignoring men in general in order to numb their past emotional pain. As much as feminists, including myself, I would totally consider myself a feminist, would condemn the stoic, emotionless mindset often found within toxic masculinity, I often turn around and see these very same women trying to use distance and a mask of indifference in order to numb their own emotional pain rather than actually working through their pain in a healthy way. And that is why I think that the boyfriend embarrassment trend is actually a little bit anti-feminist, because it might cause a woman who's actively looking for a relationship to forego an opportunity for one just because they've been hurt in the past. Consequently, I am extremely worried about women's mental health in this instance. I promise this is not me saying that I'm sad because it's reducing the chances of me getting into a relationship. Because what happens in real life doesn't really reflect the internet as much as you think. I just hope that the women who find having a loving, kind boyfriend embarrassing can work through the underlying emotions and their past traumas that made them think this way. So like I said before, men, we need to do better. But above all, I hope that women can finally heal from these underlying emotions and feel safe in this world again. I hope they won't have to put on a mask of indifference and avoidance of men anymore, and that they can truly be free in this world. So now you know about the anti-feminist nature of the boyfriend embarrassment trend. But now you probably want to know how to actually get into a relationship where your partner can feel proud that you are the one dating them. And luckily for you, I have a video up about analyzing alpha male dating advice against the findings of qualified dating psychologists, so that you can adapt your dating strategies and separate the facts from the red pill fairy tales. As always, I hope you all have a fantastic day. Peace.